Welcome. Welcome to this afternoon session. This morning it was to a large extent on the surroundings of the trail. Political surroundings and the cultural surroundings. Now it's more on tourism and the trail itself. But please keep the surroundings in your mind, because that's also important for the final discussion, the panel discussion on the future. The first speaker is Mr. Tütüncü. I hope I do pronounce the name well. Okay. Oh yeah, I did. And he is going to make a presentation, it's very interesting, on a journey made by people who not themselves are here, but are related to, am I right? If I'm wrong, please correct me. Mr. Tütüncü. Yeah. And you have 20 minutes, and there is again a PowerPoint.
Thank you, Mr. Pronk. I know you from your political life, so for the first time I met you also personally, and I'm very happy that you are the chairman here. So I'm going to speak about the history of the Sultanstrail, people who made the travels, and there are 3 topics, so I hope I can give in this 20 minutes everyone his place, but if not, I will skip one traveler, and that would be the second one, Evliya Çelebi. But let's start. So the relations between Netherlands and Turkey started in 1612 when the Turkish Sultan Ahmet, after travel of the Dutch ambassador Cornelis Haga, went to Istanbul, give Netherlands a ferman, a decree that the Dutch could have trade relations with Ottomans, and that the Dutch nation will be recognized as a separate state. So it's the first time in the history of the Dutch Republic, 1612, the Dutch uprising started in 1568, the 80 Years' War, or you all know this. The Dutch fought it 80 years long against Spain. It was a rebellious country, uprising against the king or the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So what was the case? The Ottoman Sultan was also fighting against the Charles V, the Spanish and the Austrian emperor, the Habsburgs, and the Holy Roman Empire of the Dutch nation. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That was the idea behind the Dutch and idea behind the Ottoman Sultan. So they created an alliance in 1612 that gave the Dutch a place in the nations of the world as a superpower, because the Ottoman state at that time was very influenced. Okay. Now, this is the first ambassador who went to Istanbul, Cornelis Haga. He did take a long trail. Just seen how he traveled. Ah, sorry. I hope. Where is this? Oh, yeah, here. He started here, you see, via Germany, via Vienna, but it was dangerous to travel by land. And he must conceal himself because the Vienna, that was the capital of the Habsburgs, the enemy were the Dutch fighting for. So what he did, he take a route to Venice, and then he take a boat, a ship, and traveled here by the sea, and then arrived in Istanbul. And this travel lasted 3 months. So he he started in May 1612 and arrived in September 1612. So this was one of the first travels, but not by land, but by sea, half by sea. There were, of course, other Dutch travelers before that, but that was in the service of the Habsburgs. You all know Mr. Ogier Gislaan de Bousbecq, who take away the tulips to the Holland. the Dutch land as a tulip country. The tulip came from Istanbul by the Dutch travelers, ambassadors who were in the service of the Austrians or the Habsburgs. So this is the Ottoman decree that created the Friendship Treaty. It's a very long decree. It's 7 meters long. So it's impressive and how huge document. One of the most proud possessions of the Dutch National Archives. And they have announced this as a top 15 objects they have, together with the declaration movement of the Holland. So what for us interesting is, in this Heitname, the friendship, for the first time, Netherlands is recognized as a nation. So it's recognized, and it's not recognized as Holland or Vlaming, but it says Nederlanda vilayetlerine tabi. So the Netherlands provinces, and then it announces the 6 or 7 provinces. So Holland, Zeeland, Friesland, Overijssel, Gelderland, Groningen, and that kind. So for the first time, the Dutch is recognized by an international document. That's the importance of this. A second important object from this document is connecting the Sultanstrail, is that the travel to Jerusalem for the Dutch travelers is secured, guaranteed by the Sultan. Article 63 of the document in 1612 says that no one may hinder from the provinces of the Netherlands and from places belonging there who are traveling to Holy Jerusalem. They shall not prevent it by anyone and by priests and other persons from the church named the Kimama. That is the place of where Jesus is buried. That's the Orthodox, of course, the Orthodox priests. And the others may not interfere, saying that you are Lutherans. So the Dutch are defined as Lutherans, so not Catholics, but Lutherans. So they didn't know the term of the Protestant at the time, or gereformeerd, or what other texts there are. But for the first time, the Protestants, the Dutch Protestants, are placed under the condition of the Turkish Sultan that they may travel to Jerusalem and no one may hinder him. So this is also a second very important part of this document. So first, the Dutch is recognized, and 2, the Dutch Protestants are placed under the governorship of the Turkish Sultan, under the protection of the Turkish Sultan to travel to Jerusalem. And I know that we have spoken about the Sultanstrail in Europe, but the Sultanstrail has other trails who are going even to Mecca, Jerusalem, and the holy place. And it has, I know, the Sufi Trail, but also the pilgrimage trail to Jerusalem is under the Sultanstrail. Under Sultanstrail objections, places where to go. So you see they're under the Turkish term, Nederlanda vilayetleri. So it's a very, very modern document, you know. There was, Mr. Pronk, there was a few years ago a campaign from the Dutch government who says, you must not say Holland, but Netherlands. So not Holland promotion, but Netherlands. So the Turkish Sultan knew this 400 years earlier. So he says Nederlanda, not Holland. No. So this is the opening the Sultan's Road for those who want to visit Jerusalem. Now, that is the first document I want to speak, so the starting of the relations. And the second person I will stay very short about this is Evliya Çelebi, who was a world-famous traveler who left 10 volumes travel itinerary for us. He traveled everywhere in the Ottoman Empire. So everyone, when I go to a place in Serbia, Mr. Alexandra, I take the place Evliya Çelebi with me, Niš, what he says about Niš, and then I will try to look at the urban road, where can I find traces of Evliya Çelebi, and he never disappoints me. What he writes is true, so he is a very good servant. But what Evliya writes in volume 6 is that he died in Egypt in 1685, so I give you some general information. Yeah, you can read it here. What he says is that he traveled to Holland, to Netherlands, in 1663. So he was in Vienna, and he came here to Holland with 40,000 horses or soldiers of the Crimean Khan. So it's a bit exaggerated, and I don't think it is also true, because we have what he writes about Holland is very, very sketchy, not what he writes about Niš, Belgrade, or so. But he says that Holland is a very famous country. There is the city of Amsterdam with big monasteries and very big towers and that kind of things. But it's interesting because at that time we can see the interest from the Ottoman side to Holland, because the Vlaming or the Nederlander had a famous name because they were good cartographers, they were good traders, and they had good relations with the Ottomans. So the Ottoman interest to the Holland was very, very great. So this is the map of the Ottoman Empire. I skipped this because I said because the other person I want to stay more a bit longer. So this is the third gentleman where I want to speak about it, is Gaspar Testa. And I'm very happy that two siblings of Mr. Testa, Mr. André Testa and Patrick Testa, are among us, his fifth generation of Testas. Thanks. Gaspar, and later he became Baron in 1847, Gaspar Testa, was born in Istanbul. He was one of the Levantine families. They settled in Istanbul already in 1250. And they remained seated in the place Galata or Pera. That was a Genoese colony, and Testas came from Genoa. So Mr. Testa was born in 1770, and he had a long, enduring life until 1847. And what makes this person very interesting is he served Netherlands under 5 regime changes. So he first served, he was, he was Dragoman. What is Dragoman? He was a translator or a mediator between the Sultan and the foreign power. So he was in Istanbul, but when the Dutch ambassador wanted to visit the Sultan, he must first go to Testa, and he arranged an appointment with the Sultan or with the high official. So they were very important personages, and every Western country who needed to have an audience with the Sultan must go via this Dragoman family to make an appointment. So Mr. Testa was born in Istanbul in 1770, and he served the Dutch ambassador in Istanbul and the Dutch nation under 5 regime changes in very stormy days. We have the old republic that ceased in 1794. Then it was changed, occupied by Napoleon and French troops, changed to Bataafse Republic, Batavian Republic. And Mr. Testa remained in Istanbul serving the Bataafse Republic and its ambassador. And after that, Netherlands became a kingdom of Lodewijk Napoleon, a king imported from France. And then it was incorporated into French Imperium of Napoleon, 1810, 1814. And then the next regime change was 1815, the Republic of United Belgium and Netherlands Kingdom of Willem I. And Willem I and his siblings are still here in Holland as kings venerated. So Mr. Testa served 5 times under regime changes under very difficult circumstances, Istanbul, looking for the interests and serving the Dutch interests. What for us interesting is he made a travel in 1793 from Istanbul, Constantinople to Holland. There was in the morning a question that Sultanstrail starts in Vienna and ends in Istanbul, and why this is opposite, because the trail starts in Istanbul and should end in Vienna. So Mr. Testa made the second travel, the real Sultanstrail. And what we see is, And here we see his itinerary, how he traveled. He starts, of course, in Istanbul. He follows the coastline until Silivri, and then he enters Edirne, the Bulgaria, Sofia, and then here he goes to old Yugoslavia, or what we call Serbia, via Niš. I think here is Pirot, Niš. And then he ends here, Belgrade, and then goes to Pest, or Budapest. So this is the first part of the itinerary. And the second part, it starts in Pest, Budapest, and then he follows then via Vienna, the Germany, and he arrives here in Wijhe. That's a small village between Zwolle and Deventer, because in Wijhe there was the house of Ambassador Frederik Gijsbert van Dedem. He was from aristocracy. So he stayed here some 7 or 8 months. He traveled to Leiden, to Haarlem. And Haarlem is also very important because one of his sons, Antoine, went here to the school, to the gymnasium or Latin school. And he is mentioned for Haarlemers under us, and I'm a Haarlemmer from 1972. When I came here, I was my first house stood there in the city, and my second house stood here a few hundred meters further. Antoine Testa was one of the persons who is mentioned by Nicolaas Bates in Camera Obscura as a friend, a far friend from Constantinople. So that was the son of Gaspar. So this travel of Gaspar Testa, he made a journal. He gave daily his trip, and we have found his journal in the National Archives. When I became acquainted with the family Testa, we were looking for what can we do to give back to the Holland this very important person. How can we introduce the Gaspar Testa to the Dutch public opinion? We found it very important that we should publish this itinerary, because it's for the first time that Easterner, if I call Mr. Testa an Easterner, a Levantine, he was from Levant, from the east. He was Dutch, he was Ottoman citizen, he was Christian, and he was on the service of the Dutch nation. So for the first time, we see Mr. Testa was never out of Ottoman Empire or Ottoman realm. So what he writes is observations of an Easterner, others. We have in the morning very about West-East. He is an Easterner. He comes to Holland, and his observations are, of course, very important. So when he arrives in Vienna, and that's a very important part of the book, he stays 17 days in Vienna, and he writes every day. He visited the manege, he visited the hospital, he visited the palace. And so what we see is his observations from one of the observations, for instance, that the Emperor of Austria was, he could meet him every time. Or when he was in theater, he came to a person, and it was the emperor. So in Turkey, it was not possible. And he writes, for instance, about the women's, that the women in West were very free and were very hardworking than the women in East who were sitting at home and that kind of things. It's very funny to read these observations from an Eastern, one person coming from Istanbul to Holland, and very important. And just seeing out, I will show you. This will be the cover of the book. Very important engraving made by Ignace Melling, travel to journal, and we have made, and Mr. Testa, you see, is a very nationalistic in the tricolor, rode with blue, red, white, blue, his dressings, and he has a very impressive mustache. So he like a Janissar, you know, Janissari. So and of course he has a book in his hands. So he's a man of letters, a person who knows his languages, who knows his science and languages and that kind of things. So this will be the will be the cover of the book. And I read his observations with my own travel, because I came also as an Easterner to Holland in 1972. I made nearly the same travel as Mr. Gaspar Testa. So it was a bit, I was waking up from a dream after 50 years in Holland and making the travel from 1793 to Holland. So my father and me as gastarbeiter, worker, came here. And we made the same travel as Mr. Gaspar Testa. So it's also for the Dutch community, for 500 people, 5,000 people. It would be a very good book to read this. Book. I have time, Mr. Chairman. How? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, because it's. We hope to introduce this book launch at 15th of November or 14th of November here in Haarlem, in the Janskerk. That's here in the center of Haarlem. And I wanted to launch this in the Janskerk because it was my house was on the few meters from this church, so it was for me a déjà vu. When I passed through the Janskerk, and you know everyone the story of the Ridders van Sint-Jan, that's Johanniter, the Hospitalier, the Ridders, or what you say, the Chevalier, who traveled to Jerusalem during the Crusades and conquered Jerusalem. So they have a story as what you say, doing the Jerusalem. Maybe the wrong story because they want to conquer it with sword and fighting. But anyone, they have relations with Jerusalem, so I wanted to have the book launch there. And that is where also the Noord-Hollands Archief is housed today. And the director of the archive accorded that the book launch could be there. So I'm very happy. And you are all invited, 14th November. Please notice in your agenda and come to Janskerk. Okay, I wanted to go to another aspect of the Sultan's route, and that's maybe for our Serbian friends here important. That is Belgrade as a port where Sultanstrail come, because Belgrade was the basis where the Ottomans troops always came and they launched their campaigns to conquer Vienna or to Esztergom or to other places. But Belgrade changed a few times hands. You see here how many times Belgrade was sieged and changed hands. And one of the last wars was 1789, and that was a few years before Mr. Testa, Gaspar Testa, came to Belgrade and to Vienna. And in this book, he writes about this, the war, and the devastating war between Austria and Turkey, and how Belgrade was looted by Austrian troops. They take away Ottoman artifacts to Vienna. And when I traveled to Austria, and Mr. Testa writes about, there is Mr. Feldmarschalk, Field Marshal Laudon. He was the commander of the Austrians who take Belgrade in 1792. And Mr. Testa met him also a few months before his death. So he describes, but what Laudon wanted is that his tomb would be made an Eastern style. So he wanted Ottoman writings and Ottoman sarcophag. So what he did is he take away from Belgrade Ottoman Pasha's sarcophag, who died there maybe a few hundred years earlier. And I will show it. In Hadersdorf, that is a small village on the margin of Vienna, there is the tomb of General Laudon. And these are the artifacts that he take away from Belgrade. And what he did, what he wanted, is that this would be embellish his tomb. And here it says Prince Eugen Robert, but in Feldmarschall Laudon, I read in German, erobert in 1789 die Stadt neuerlich und ließ als Siegesmal die Grabtafel dieses türkischen Befehlshabers und 2 Marmorplatten aus Konstantinopel, so from the Constantinople, auf seinem Gut aufstellen. So what he wanted is that this sarcophag that's now mounted on the wall, he wanted this there, his coffin will be inside, buried there. But when he died, his wife decided it's not very good for a Westerner to be buried in an Eastern style. So what she did, she made for him a Western sarcophag, and you see here copies, but also with Ottoman half moons and Ottoman turban and that kind of things. So she made a sarcophag, and in Western style. She buried him there, but a few hundred meters nearby, she decided to build a building, a wall, and mount the booties on this wall. So it's very interesting, I think, also for the Sultanstrail to have these memories from Belgrade connecting Vienna and connecting also to Istanbul, because most of these sarcophagi and buildings were from the Istanbul Kapı, the Istanbul wall there. So I hope that the Sultans Trail, and we spoke about the cultural enlarging of this trail, not only political, these kind of things could help us remember about how important the Sultans Trail was, not only in war, but also only in cultural heritage. Thank you for this listening to me.
Thank you for this lively storage about travels in the past and the present.